Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back. It is exactly 8:38 a.m. and we are now going to be unpacking the international conference of Call of AlAqsa. It was hosted in Iraq, and the organizers of this international conference announced the importance of international cooperation and solidarity among believers regarding the Palestinian issue, realization of justice, support for the oppressed nations, and above all, the Palestinian nation among the goals of holding this international conference. To talk to us about it, a person who was fortunate enough to attend the conference, it was a 3-day conference held recently, is executive member at MRN, Dr. Ahmed Haroon Jazbhay. Assalamu alaikum to you. Welcome to the program. Dr. Ahmed Jazbhay, are you there? Can you hear me? I think the picture has frozen. Let's try again. Dr. Jazbhay, are you there? Can you hear me? Okay, he is busy reconnecting. Let me also tell you what else is coming up on the show today. We'll be talking with Karina van Wyk, Head of Education and Training at TriFacts, that is Africa Checks Training, Research and Info Unit. Also on the show, Dr. Vuzi Muzi Sabanda, Chairperson of the African Diaspora Forum, to talk about the ZDP holders. They've been given an extension by a further 6 months. What does that mean for them? What will they be doing in the interim? Is there an opportunity for them to reapply to remain possibly indefinitely in South Africa? Also, Dr. Imtiaz Suleiman will be joining us to talk to us about the disaster of the collapse of the mine dam collapse in Jagersfontein, that of course is in the Free State. And we are now standing by for executive member at MRN, Dr. Ahmed Haroon Jazbhay. He's just returned from a three-day international conference. It was for the call of AlAqsa. It was held in Iraq. Do we have him online? I think in literally a half a minute, he will be with us, and Alhamdulillah, he's there. Dr. Ahmed Haroon Jazbhay, welcome back. Assalamu alaikum to you. Nice to have you on the show this morning.
Wa alaikum salam. Shukran for having me.
Okay, so you attended this 3-day conference, call of AlAqsa. It was in Iraq. There were over 200 other scholars that presented papers there. So did you. I'd like you to start with your introduction, Colonialism in Palestine. This goes right back to the Balfour Declaration in the year 1948, and I can't believe that many years later, these people are still living under the shackles of colonialism.
Yes, I mean the conference in Iraq, Julie, was discussed various issues around the Palestinian issue, from both from a intellectual perspective, from a religious perspective, the Islamic perspective. It reaffirmed the importance of Islam as central to the struggle in Palestine, which is often lost in many solidarity circles. My paper discussed the idea that what is occurring in Palestine, it's common knowledge that, and it's been theorized as colonialism of a special kind, if I may put it that way. But I argue that the colonial contract, which I like to call it, is revolves around what is referred to as a paradigm of war. That means it's a paradigm or a narrative that privileges conflict against the Palestinians above all else. It privileges humanity, social relations, and conflict as primarily the way in which Palestinians are engaged with around the world, be it from the West, be it from even some how do I put it, some allies of apartheid Israel who happen to be Muslim, who have social relations, which have diplomatic relations with Israel, and they enable this paradigm of war, which occurs in three violent ways, if I may put it that way. Settler colonialism, which is inherently violent and that needs no explanation. Uh, then you have the socio-economic conflict, as well as Islamophobia. These three elements comprise the paradigm of war, and which aims to subjugate Palestinians and ensure that they remain, stuck within the shackles of Zionist settler colonialism.
Okay, interestingly enough, my previous interview was with Dr. Mona Amir. She's the professor of clinical and community psychology at the American University in Cairo, and we were talking post 9/11, 21 years since the supposed terrorist attacks in America and the retaliation there too, which seems to still be prevalent in this day and age. Wherever you look, I think this Islamophobic tendencies all around the world is a direct result of post 9/11. Be that as it may, the papers presented by other people at the conference, other scholars at the conference, were they very different to your thinking, or were you all thinking along the same pathway? And then 200 people presenting papers, or there were 200 delegates, and a lot of them presented papers. How do we move on from here? We're all applying our minds to the situation in Palestine and the Middle East, and the geopolitics playing out in that part of the world. There has to come a time when we start acting, when we start being more concrete in our efforts to the situation.
Yes, Julie. I mean, there were a number of papers as well as speeches from religious scholars and so on from across the world, be it within the Middle East, the West, Asia, and so on. Some were academic papers, some were religiously inspired speeches. So it was a wide spectrum. Whilst every delegate would, if you would agree that is a special form of colonialism or colonialism of special kind. There were practical measures. I mean, another delegate from South Africa, Attorney Ziad Patel, who was also present, spoke about the various measures that are underway in South Africa to assist to prosecute Zionist soldiers, South Africans that served in the Israeli army, as well as special bills in parliament to protect Palestinian solidarity and to ensure that funding is limited that goes from South African to Israel. So whilst there were a lot of motivational speeches, a lot of academic speeches, and exchanging of ideas and knowledge, there was this practical side of it, to say that whilst many of us always find the arguments, what else can we do, what practical, here are some practical steps in your specific context, in your specific countries. Even in the UK, there are moves in which to attempt to prosecute Zionist soldiers that serve in the Israeli army, because this goes against UK law, and in South Africa it goes against the Foreign Military Assistance Act. It's a criminal offense for any South African to serve in a foreign army. So these are some of the practical steps that were spoken about in terms of how to express solidarity and how to ensure that we do something, as opposed to just becoming talk shops and intellectualizing the struggle and so on. So there are practical measures that can be done. However, it is important that within our various contexts that we try to do something, that we try to do to ensure that we doing some practical steps, whether it's BDS, some limited form of BDS, whether it is this attempts to prosecute Israeli soldiers in our various contexts. But it's important that you do something, and these are practical measures that can be done to hold Zionists accountable. We've seen in South Africa that there are a number of soldiers that serve in the Israeli army, and they are never prosecuted. There appears to be a political lack of political will in this country, and the solidarity movement will be upping the ante recently to force the National Director of Prosecutions to make a decision on whether to prosecute or not. So, my paper spoke about the intellectual side of it as an academic, which is something that I speak about. It's important that we ensure, in a practical sense, as you speak about, that we change the narrative. We change the narrative within our various spaces, whether it's the modules we teach at university, whether it's the curriculum of schools and other universities as well. These are practical measures we can make from within our various zones we find ourselves in, as opposed to simply just talking about it. We need to ensure that we change the narrative. The narrative is presently still very firmly under the control of the Zionists, but within our various spheres of influence, we can attempt to change that. And that is the best way in which to do it, because you will notice that when uh, an Israeli settler, is assassinated in the West Bank, it is immediately referred to as terrorism. But when the Israeli army, wanton destruction of Palestinian property and lives and so on, this is regarded as Israel defending itself. We have to try to change that narrative, and that's what we try to do. Many speakers try to do, and that was the one of the you know take backs from the conference, that within your various spheres of influence, attempt to change the narrative. Do something within the laws of your country to influence, to hold Zionists accountable, because there are many Zionists in many parts of the world that operate with impunity. So it's important that we try to do these things.
Did you find that there was a similar thread running through all of the presentations that were made at the conference regarding Islamophobia, regarding the oppression and the terrorizing of Palestinian people? And then you also referred to colonialism of a special kind. What are you what are you saying by that statement, colonialism of a special kind? Could you respond to those three questions, please?
Yes. Okay, I'll start with the third one, the issue of colonialism of special kind. What you must understand is that colonialism, the much of the world has been decolonized, if we can put it that way, where the direct colonialism has ended, much of the world. But in Palestine, direct colonialism continues, and it continues unabated. But why we call it colonialism of a special kind is, after World War II, during the creation of and the creation of Israel, uh, Zionist Israelis were granted what I would like to call access into whiteness as compensation for the guilt of the Holocaust. So whiteness is, is a narrative or a paradigm that privileges Europeanness, that privileges whiteness. And if you go to Palestine, you'll notice that the majority of Israelis are of European descent. They are not indigenous to Palestine, which is why we call it colonialism of a special kind, because we have a continuation of colonialism under whiteness, with the tacit approval of Western powers as compensation for the guilt of the Holocaust. So this is why we refer to that. In terms of whether many viewed it as Islamophobia, to some extent, yes. When we had our private discussions, many consider that this is an issue of Islamophobia, because the majority of Palestinians are Muslim, and the majority of Palestinians view Islam as central to their lives and central to the struggle for liberation. Al-Aqsa is central. We had forget her name, the mother of the paramedic that was murdered in Gaza during the Great March of Return. I think it was Rana. I forget the name, but it's a very famous story. And she very much identified. She said, this is a struggle for Al-Aqsa. My daughter passed away, was assassinated because, although she was not directly involved in the marches, she was there to assist in terms of the paramedic services to the injured. She was murdered, and the mother had the blood-soaked vest in which her daughter was assassinated in. Even we had Jamal al-Duhra, if you remember, in the second Intifada, his 12-year-old son was murdered while they were hiding behind a block, and he failed to protect his son because the bullet went through his hand and
Oh,
went through the head of his son. But he also identified, he said that this is a struggle for Al-Aqsa. So we can see that the Zionists know the centrality of Al-Aqsa, the importance of Al-Aqsa, and which is why they aim to fight against Islam. They ensure that they minimize Islam. We've seen in the West Bank where, unfortunately, the Palestinian Authority controls there, and much of the curriculum has been secularized because they want to ensure that we talk about the struggle for Palestine in secular terms. So it's like many people spoke about directly or indirectly the need to ensure that Al-Aqsa remains central, that Islam remains central. The majority of Palestinians are Muslim and continue to identify as Muslims. So we need to ensure that Islam remains central and be wary of attempts to distort the narrative to take Islam out of this equation.
Dr. Ahmed Jazbhay, executive member of MRN, shukran very much for sharing your thoughts with us on this 3-day conference that you've just returned from in Iraq regarding the situation in Palestine and the whole thrust, as you say. The conference was the call of Al-Aqsa. Thank you once again. Go well, and salaam alaikum to you.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
It is exactly 8:55 a.m. Standing by to talk with us is Dr. Imtiaz Suleiman, founder of Gift of the Givers, about the disaster at the mine dam collapse in Jagersfontein. We'll be with him in a minute or two.